Hello again. I'm wearing another hat. So I told Don and others that people will be really sick of seeing me, and I try my best. So again, as I told you in the morning, one of the perks of my job is sometimes really going around the world and seeing really interesting people doing really interesting work, and it's almost like a journalist. And another model that I really fell in love with is very different than the one that I just mentioned in the morning, and a bit different than what we're hearing so far, which has been mostly ventures. But this is some exciting things that are happening within large companies, within large multinational corporations. Interestingly, some of the really interesting thinking and innovative and entrepreneurial thinking is also happening in big corporations like Mars. As Kyung mentioned, Mars is famous for chocolates, for sweet stuff, and as well as, not many people know this, but it's a private company, it's not public. $20 billion private company, not bad. And headquarters in McLean, Virginia. And people say there are two secretive organizations in McLean. One of them is CIA, and the other one being the Mars family. So nobody really knows what's going inside. But so I became part of something that Mars was doing about 8-9 years ago on something called the economics of mutuality. Mars, by the virtue of being private, they were thinking about long-term questions in terms of what makes good business succeed in the long run. And they commissioned a paper by a Wharton professor at the University of Pennsylvania on why maximizing profit does not maximize shareholder value. Why maximizing profit is not the same as maximizing shareholder value. It does not always help the sustainability, it just maximizes one thing. And they have some compelling numbers on strategies to maximize short-term quarterly profit has no relationship with the value of the shares over a long period of time. And based on that and other evidence, they've been asking the question, okay, so if the goal is not to maximize financing, what else should you be maximizing? And what the company decided is that they're going to try to focus on three things: people, profits, and planet. People, profits, and planet. So if the Mars is going in the direction, how do you measure it? How do you measure people, profits, and planet? Because whatever you do, whatever you put as an indicator, people are going to go for it. So this is the effort to build an entire think tank within Mars Corporation to figure out this question: how to measure this, and will it work? Will the business use it? And will this really challenge the early question we have today, the why firms exist? If the firms exist for profits, then what else should be an alternative model to the Freeman School of Economics, which is the only reason why firms should exist is to make profits. If there has to be an alternative school, what it would look like, not only in theory, but in practice. So this is the economics of mutuality movement, and we're gonna have a little video clip from one of the principals who started this at the end. We sent this just for our conference. So again, we'll have a word from Jay Yacob. So let me just start again with a video about the economics of mutuality.
There's a widespread view that corporations have failed. Failures of systems like the financial system, environmental degradation, excessive pay, failure to pay taxes, all those sorts of things. So there's a wide understanding within the corporate world that reform is needed.
For me, this story really began when one of our shareholders posed the question, what should the right level of profit be for a corporation? Friedman said that the sole social responsibility of business is to maximize profit for distribution to shareholders. But this particular shareholder was challenging that paradigm and saying, no, there is a right level of profit. The Friedman model of financial capitalism that has been implemented through business schools and in corporations throughout the world was great at generating large amount of financial capital, but now that's become almost dysfunctional. Economics is really about the management of scarcities. And when Milton Friedman created his model that only really measure and allow managers to manage financial capital was created when there was a global scarcity of financial capital, but there was a global surplus of natural resources. And it was also at a time when the world had a global surplus of labor. We now have a very different set of scarcities that we need to manage. If the business model in which you're operating under and the rules of the game are actually changing, then you've actually got to change as well your ways of operating. And if you don't, then you're risking your entire business.
When a company makes too much profit, it is destroying something in the supply chain, but it is hidden. And a supply chain is as solid as the weakest link. So if the weakest link breaks, the whole supply chain can be broken.
The idea behind Mutuality is actually to create mutually beneficial relationships throughout what we would call a value chain. So from the farmer who's actually growing the commodities up through the manufacturer, the distributor, and ultimately the consumer. Every relationship in that value chain, if it's based on mutually beneficial relationships that meet each other's expectations, you actually get a higher level of business performance in the end. So there's 4 different forms of capital. Human capital, and that's expressed at the individual level in terms of the well-being, the human flourishing of the individual within the workplace. Social capital is a form of capital that we would find among people. Social capital would be expressed at a community level. Natural capital, the value of the natural resources that are consumed in the production of whatever the product may be, and financial capital. And financial capital currently has a very large set of metrics, and we're not looking to do away with those metrics because they're very valuable, but we're looking to significantly enhance them. You only manage what you measure in business. So if you don't have the metrics that actually can measure other forms of capital and assess the value that they bring to the company, they tend to be invisible, yet they're still there. They're still impactful.
The first 5 years of our research was spent to define these new metrics. So the financial capital was easy. It was very well defined. Social capital, human capital, and also natural capital was a bit more complex. By creating stable, actionable and simple metrics to measure this different form of capital, you create a business model that is superior in terms of value creation, not only for the shared financial capital, but across the board. The most important element of human capital are what is called in academia the concept of prospect of upward mobility, PUM effect. So when you know that you have the capability to grow in your job, it's a huge element of human capital. Also, second thing is that your job matters. It has a purpose. Beyond making money, or there is an element of dreams, of vision. And the third one is an element about the quality of the relationship that you have with your supervisor.
Social capital would be expressed at a community level in terms of variables like social cohesion, trust, and capacity for collective action within a community. These are the 3 metrics that identify how much social fertility there is within a community.
What are all the natural resources that are required to produce the final product throughout the entire value chain? Biotic materials, so organics essentially, abiotic materials, who are inorganic materials, consumption of water, consumption of air through oxidation processes, and then the topsoil erosion.
Shared financial capital is who gets what throughout every part of the value chain, going all the way down to the consumer. What we were able to do was to create a curve of distribution of value across that chain. And the steeper this curve, the more unevenly the value is distributed. And if there are some members in that value chain that are actually receiving too little from what it is that they're contributing to that supply chain, then that supply chain becomes more fragile.
We had the chance to go to Africa and to test this idea in the slums outside Nairobi.
There was not much financial capital, but there's a lot of human capital and a lot of social capital. So there was a lot of people with skills that are underutilized, as well as existing networks of trust in the community that can be leveraged.
If we could connect social capital, this human capital, and with the financial capital, we could create a business that would be superior in terms of value creation than the traditional one.
We introduced them to Wrigley products. We just said, we'll give it to you at a good margin. We trained them on our products. We trained them on basic selling techniques. Not only that, we're saying we're not totally judging anyone on sales. We're totally judging our team on the amount of human capital and social capital they deliver and the well-being of the entrepreneurs and their livelihoods in general. So it's very uncomfortable. Bloom is MAUA 2.0. It's testing the MAUA model in another geography and another culture. Bloom today is around 100 micro-entrepreneurs. It is already profitable, and it's part of a national rollout plan for both Wrigley and chocolate. There's an intention to bring it to other geographies across East Africa, across big markets like Nigeria, Indonesia, and we're actively working on a pilot for China.
We managed to identify a series of entrepreneurs who simply take our product into those places we can't reach. What happens then is we grow our business and they have a great living out of it, and that's been a spectacular success. It's been far more successful than we ever envisaged.
MAUA is very profitable. It delivers real business value.
I really see it making a big impact on the business, but also making a big impact on society. Yeah, every time we mention MAUA to people, I mean, they get excited because of the difference that it's making to people's lives.
The fact that the model driven on Mutuality was more profitable, growing faster, and creating all form of capital at the same time was really a big surprise.
I was asked to come in and do an external peer review of the project Economics Mutuality to validate the quality, the relevance, whether the academic discipline was being followed, to make sure that it was going to be produced with the right scientific methods, the right academic discipline, and so forth. So we assembled a panel of 9 individuals. It included the director of the Paris School of Economics, the vice chair of Walmart, several other distinguished academic and business people. And the results of that were overwhelming endorsement for the project. So I think it's going to turn out being a universal theory that anyone can adapt to their particular situation.
Economics of Mutuality will be positioned as an alternative business model approach to Milton Friedman's Chicago School of Business.
This is potentially a model that can transform the way in which business in general operates.
This new economic model is based on the very simple principle of mutuality, which in English means sharing. When you have a business which is based on the concept of sharing, you create a business model that is superior in terms of value creation. When you create shared benefits, it's good for everyone.
Okay. So, what do you think about the video? Very interesting, isn't it? Yeah, it's we always think that all this innovations happen from bottom up, but this is a really interesting initiative at the global corporate level. It all started with a very simple, innocent question: from Mars, that what's the right level of profit? What should be the right level of profit in a company? It's a very funny question to ask from a $20 billion company. So this is how it started. We're going to walk you through a little bit more about how this works in practice. So, I mean, the video was a bit motivational, but let me just walk you through it. I mean, I'm not an expert on EOM, but I've been enough walking through it very at the beginning, from when I first sat down with Bruno and Jay in a cafe and we talked about the concept almost 10 years ago. So I've been walking them through very much carefully in different parts of the world. So let me see if I can do justice. So, and this is the question: is there an optimal level of profit that optimizes long-term value creation? And that's, again, the Milton Friedman school going in response to that, against this thought. So instead of saying the purpose of business is to make profit, is to find profitable solutions. So this is an alternative response. Instead of the role of the firm to make profits, what about the idea of making profitable solutions? Okay, let's see. So I think in the video, we were talking about what to measure. And the question is, how do you measure non-financial forms of capital? And that's really the practical implementation question they were talking. And the one approach to that is to measure, focus on mutual profits. Have a view of capital that encompasses a mutual profitability. And along these 4 areas, which I think Jay, Bruno, and others have mentioned, social, human, natural, and shared financial capital, they've spent an enormous amount of time developing this metric. They spent about 4 years figuring out what are the determinants of social capital, human capital, natural capital, and shared financial capital. They did pilots all over the world, multi-country, thousands of each country samples to determine what is social capital in each of those countries, in Africa, Oceania, and other geographies, to make sure that the results were stable and they can be applicable in other countries. So social capital, for example, the biggest correlation of social capital is trust and ability to do collective action. So those are two areas of 2 ways specifically how your social capital is defined. And what happened is, in the MAWA program, in the Bloom program, these are the early pilots. Once the metrics were defined, they used these metrics to evaluate the performance of distributors of Mars products. These are usually small mom and pop shops, 구멍 가게들. So in these distributors, they were able to see one group with normal incentives. I think Clara mentioned this, with just normal incentives or financial incentives. Another group which was rewarded by the social capital it created. And using these 2 groups, the group that had the social capital actually was more profitable. And so they really prove empirically that focusing on other forms of capital works, even in the bottom line. So that's the example, the results of the early pilot. And because of this, they're really scaling this up nationally and internationally. One of the innovations, practical innovations they created, is the whole idea of mutual P&L in accounting. Now, how does it work? So essentially, the biggest challenge in measuring impact in your finance is that the benefits are long-term. So it's really hard to concretely measure into your company's valuation or performance using the standard accounting system. So the Oxford Science School of Business and other researchers spend a lot of time thinking how to incorporate these impact values in accounting. They have a partnership with Oxford and to do research, and they have a conference every year on this topic. So one way to think about mutual P&L is to how to think about the entire value chain and ecosystem, not just Mars, but how does your activities of the entire system affects the sustainability? How does it generate long-term capital for the ecosystem? And how do you measure that and record that in your accounting? And one way to do that for them is to treat them as very similar to R&D, which is long-term investment, not as a cost, but you treat it as an investment, as a long-term. It helps, it changes valuation. It also, it frees them from treating a lot of these activities as a cost, which will make many of these initiatives unsustainable. So there are many other examples in terms of how they account into these impact activities in a corporate balance sheet, but this is like a one way of one solution they found. But there are many others. We don't have time to go over all of these, but so just sum it up. The focus has been new metrics. The new metrics has turned into new business practices, and that is leading into new management theories through a body of research and practice on this topic. So let me just invite Jay, not live, but recorded a short 5-minute video that he prepared for this conference.
Hello, my name is Jay Jacob. I work for Mars Incorporated out of its global headquarters near Washington, D.C. I help lead the internal think tank of this food and beverage company, which has revenues of about maybe $38 to $40 billion per annum and about 100,000 employees scattered around the world. We're organized into multiple business segments focused around pet care and pet food, and also on chocolate and chewing gum, on food products and drink products as well. Thank you for inviting me to your conference. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but I believe that someone is presenting a case study on a new business model that we've been developing and testing over the last decade at Mars, and with some external partners as well, and that we're helping to teach at Oxford University's Business School, called The Economics of Mutuality. So just to address your three questions that I believe you're asking each presenter to provide answers to. The first is, how does the presentation on the economics of mutuality address moral and ethical principles in the practice and development and/or sustainable business? So, for example, economics of mutuality, which is called for short EOM by its initials, is entirely based on both moral and ethical principles. But unlike a traditional CSR or sustainability type of initiative, it can simultaneously optimize people, planet, and profit, making businesses that run on this new model and on its principles, both profitable and sustainable. First, the economics of mutuality takes an ecosystem approach to setting up any new business, putting the company and profit maximization more at the periphery of an ecosystem of stakeholders rather than at the center. In a way, it's like a Copernican revolution, where businesses had traditionally thought that they were the center of their ecosystem and that profit maximization was everything. And what this approach requires businesses to do is to realize that they are part of a broader ecosystem of stakeholders and that they're actually one of many and not at the center. And profit maximization is not the objective of economics of mutuality, yet as you will see in the presentation that you'll get later on the case study, economics of mutuality actually can provide more profitable businesses by putting the interests of the stakeholders ahead of the interests of the shareholders, although the shareholders wind up benefiting very, very well indeed. So second, I believe your question is, how do case studies on the economics of mutuality address the gap between the theory and practice of sustainable business and development today? This is an easy one for me to answer because we have been actually running businesses, setting up businesses that have new key performance indicators that are non-financial in nature, that are based around non-financial forms of capital that we call human capital, individual well-being in the workplace, that we call social capital, which is expressed at a community level in terms of trust, social cohesiveness, and the capacity to work collectively. Natural capital, which we measure for the purpose of KPI as the input metrics, so universal metrics that actually account for maybe 85% of all of the natural environmental resources that are used to manufacture anything from a candy bar to an automobile. These are not rocket science, they're abiotic and biotic materials, land erosion, air, and water, not all of which are actionable for business, but the ones that are actually can create great efficiencies of managing natural resources on the input side and leave a smaller footprint on the output side. And the fourth and final form of capital that we work with in this model is called shared financial capital. And shared financial capital is simply looking at profit and shared financial capital across a value chain of partners that may be in a commodity-based business like ours. At one end of the value chain would be the growers, the farmers of things like cocoa and other commodities that are used. Processors would be sort of in that chain as well, as would be the manufacturer. And eventually the distributor and the consumer would be at the other end. And so shared financial capital is really about breaking down how much of the value of the finished product that is derived from commodities that are grown at source, adjusted for things like purchasing power parity of each player and risk that's involved in level of investment. How is the value distributed across that whole value chain? So again, human capital, social capital, natural capital, and shared financial capital are the new KPI, the metrics that we use to drive business performance rather than things like sales and retained earnings for the company. Although we do track sales and retained earnings, but we find by putting the interests of the stakeholders like the communities that we're working in, the farmers that may be there, or in a route to market business that you may hear about later in this conference, you'll find that growing the social and human capital of these individuals and communities that are involved is the main objective of the business. And by so doing, we find that economics mutuality-based businesses actually release, because they're correlated with financial capital. So non-financial capital as drivers can often release greater financial capital as well, and everyone benefits in a much greater way. And we have businesses that are set up in Africa that are now scaling up. Also in Southeast Asia, we're now piloting new economics mutuality programs across a number of European markets and elsewhere. And so we're very much closing that gap between the theory and practice of sustainable business and development today, but again, in ways that are both profitable and scalable. And I would use the analogy of lean thinking, if any of you remember the revolution in the automotive industry in the 1970s, where quality, time, and cost were the three variables that could not be optimized simultaneously, until lean thinking came along and gave the automotive manufacturers the ability to optimize both quality, time, and cost without any trade-off. Similarly, economics mutuality is about optimizing simultaneously contributions to people, planet, and profit in terms of performance to the company. And so your last question, I think I may have already addressed, which is what can be practically done to address this gap? I think the next step for us, in addition to bringing more into the mainstream of the core business, these new KPI, these new metrics and management practices that deliver more mutual outcomes, is to share these findings very openly, both at the educational level for executive education programs. We've run one of those earlier this year at Oxford University for a number of business leaders, but also for MBA programs at various universities. And then in the practical business side, we're taking our unit, our internal think tank of Mars, externally next year, so that we can partner not only with Mars in running more and more economics mutuality businesses, but also can bring in other partners from other corporations, other sectors of the economy, and foundations. So I wish you the very best with your program, and I welcome any feedback that you'd like to share afterward on what it is we're doing, or if any of you would like to know more about the economics of mutuality, you can find us on our website, www.economicsofmutuality.org. So please feel free to have a look. I was also the co-author with the chief economist of Mars, who leads our unit, on a book that was published last year called Completing Capitalism, Healing Business to Heal the World. And part of the story there is in that book about how this journey progressed, how the metrics work, how the management practices work, and some case study material as well. So have a wonderful conference. I wish you all the very best.
I will also let Jay know that you applauded. Okay. So, exciting, at least I think what's happening. I just wanted to finish by picking out what Jay said, that there is a lot happening in this area. There's an annual conference at Oxford on this. There are literally hundreds of practitioners just like this come and talk about different experiments with economics mutuality, sharing their pilots, or new person who are interested in knowing more about it, applying the tools, experimenting with this. I hope to see more representatives from Korea to go to Oxford every year, or the people are here, whether from San Francisco or somewhere else. So I hope to see some of you at Oxford next year. And there's a book about this that Bruno and Jay just authored, and there are more books about this coming in partnership with Oxford. So they really want to make this as a global movement. So there is, as this is something that Jay already mentioned. Yes. So yeah, I think we'll be sending some of these presentations with some of the links, everything that Jay mentioned, and we'll hopefully make that available to you guys at some point. But thank you so much.
Thank you for your presentation. It was a good opportunity to learn about the UN. My question is how the economics of mutuality can be distinguished from other similar concepts such as CSR or trading share values.
You almost sound like my class. We just talked about exactly the same issue. So CSR is more about giving. It's I think it's it's a relatively simple way of activity. Share value, it has the same spirit. Michael Porter, I come from Michael Porter's school of thought because I work at Monitor, basically a company he co-founded. So most of my training was all about competitive advantage, how to achieve competitive advantage. And share value is essentially about how to achieve competitive advantage, which I think is really good. It's a really good thing. However, economics of mutuality is not about achieving that's not the main goal. The main goal is really the long-term sustainability of companies and creating better ecosystems. There's a lot of things that are similar in terms of form, but in terms of purpose and in terms of coverage, is a broader concept than share value, I would say. I think that both are worthwhile things to support. They're in their own different ways and methodologies. These are really good things for the world. They're both responding to the Friedman School of Thought that the ultimate goal of the company is not profits, but something else. Okay? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I know that Jay is not here to answer, so maybe you could speak on his behalf. I'm not trying to question the motivations of the company. I think it's great that we have large companies interested in people, planet, and profit. I wonder though, maybe you could give some insight or some color as to to what extent you think that this sort of push to study the economics of mutuality and to really push for it, how that was possible, especially considering maybe it's a family-owned company, so maybe there's an interest in some sort of bigger legacy outside of the company. Also that it's privately owned rather than publicly traded, so maybe there's not a lot of external hindrance or obstacles. And also, although I love chocolate, the business itself is, some might question whether it's a very socially responsible business in and of itself. And so again, it's not to question the motivation, but maybe to what extent that might be possible, including all of the university collaborations. There's a similar thing with, I think, British Tobacco. They gave the University of Nottingham quite a bit of money to set up a center for social responsibilities. I'm wondering if you could give some insights to that.
Yes. Great questions. Great questions. And I heard that a lot. And again, I'm not representing Mars, and I'm not representing Jay, and I'm not getting paid by Mars or Jay, and mostly Jay will do to give me more candies. So Jay's a way of introducing, he doesn't have business, well, he has a business card, but instead of giving the business card, he gives M&M chocolates as a hello, I'm Jay and I'm from Mars. That's his business card. So your question was motivation, about what's motivating Mars to do it, and I mean, is that consistent to everything in terms of the company values and so forth. And I don't have a perfect answer for that. I don't claim to have a perfect answer for that. I do know because they are the privately held company, a family. They can afford to think differently, so I don't have an answer for all your questions, but I do know that this is a real serious effort, and people are paying attention. And public companies like Unilever, and now in other industries, even like sovereign wealth funds in some countries in Asia, which I cannot name, they are paying attention to this of other industries in terms of how to translate this into their business models. So it is becoming a global movement. Yes, you could question whether the products they're making is socially responsible and so forth. I don't. That's a fair question, and I don't have the answer for that. But I think also we need to be really careful not let it distract us from the real good that they're actually creating. So that's the only thing I can say to the fairness of both your questions and to Mars, is that this is a real serious movement. And the people behind it are people with a lot of integrity that I know personally. I can really vouch for them in many different ways. So I think it's really worth paying attention to. So, but to be fair to your question, it is a really good question. So thank you. Good? Thank you very much. Thank you.